10,000 pesos. In 1944, that was the price the Imperial Japanese Army placed on the head of a single schoolteacher. Not a seasoned general, not a trained assassin, but a woman in a floral dress who had never held a weapon until her world was set on fire. Her name was Nieves Fernandez. Before the occupation, she was a quiet, respected figure in Tacloban, known to her students simply as Miss Fernandez. She lived a life of books, lessons, and community, but the invasion of Leyte in 1941 shattered that peace. The turning point wasn't just the occupation itself, it was the specific brutality documented in the Philippine National Archives. Japanese forces began a campaign of systematic robbery, seizing every bit of food and property the locals owned. But for Nieves, the final straw came when the soldiers targeted her school. Reliable accounts from the time state that she was informed her female students were to be taken away and used as comfort women. This was the moment the teacher died and the commander was born. She disappeared into the dense, humid jungles of Leyte, trading her chalk for a long-bladed bolo knife. To the Japanese, she became a ghost in the canopy. She wasn't just hiding, she was recruiting. She gathered 110 native men, farmers, laborers, and fathers, and turned them into the gas pipe gang. While the world looked at the massive carrier battles in the Pacific, a silent war was being waged in the undergrowth. The woman who once guided students was now orchestrating ambushes so precise that the enemy high command stopped viewing her as a civilian and started treating her as a primary threat to their control of the island. They wanted her dead because she proved that an empire could be bled dry by the people it underestimated most. The 10,000 peso bounty wasn't just for her capture. It was a desperate attempt to stop a schoolteacher from teaching an entire nation how to revolt. The most dangerous thing about Nieves Fernandez's unit wasn't just their courage, it was their ingenuity. In the military archives of the resistance, they are often remembered by a specific gritty nickname, the Gas Pipe Gang. When Nieves retreated into the jungle with her 110 volunteers, they faced a lethal problem. They had a total of 3 American-issue rifles for over 100 men. To the Japanese, an unarmed rebellion was a minor nuisance. But Nieves was a teacher and she knew how to solve for the missing variables. She turned the jungle into a clandestine factory, using scrap metal scavenged from bombed-out buildings, curtain rods, and even wreckage from derelict naval ships. Her men began forging the pot. These weren't professional firearms. They were psychological and physical terror packed into a rusty tube. The design was brutally simple. A section of iron gas pipe served as the barrel, lashed to a hand-carved wooden stock that often mimicked the shape of a Springfield rifle. But the real forgotten fighter genius was in the firing mechanism. Without access to standardized firing pins or springs, Nieves' men used a slam fire or nail strike system. A long sharpened masonry nail was fitted through a reinforced hole at the back of the pipe. When a soldier struck the back of the nail with a heavy object or released a crude spring-loaded bolt, it would slam into the primer of a handmade shell. Supplies of real ammunition were non-existent, so they improvised their own black powder mixtures, often using unstable chemicals that made the guns nearly as dangerous to the shooter as they were to the target. For projectiles, they didn't use lead bullets. They used the garbage of war. They packed the pipes with iron filings, jagged shards of scrap metal, and hand-cut nails. At close range, in the thick humidity of the Leyte brush, a single blast from a gas pipe shotgun acted like a primitive claymore mine, shredding anything in its path. This wasn't just desperate manufacturing, it was a tactical choice. By arming every man with a weapon made of trash, Nieves ensured that her unit could never truly be disarmed. If a soldier lost his pipe gun, he could build another from the ruins of the next village. The Japanese were fighting a modern army. Nieves was leading a ghost unit that manufactured its own lightning out of gas pipes and nails. The gas pipe gang had the firepower, but Nieves Fernandez knew that noise was a luxury they couldn't afford. To survive against a superior force, she turned the dense, suffocating humidity of the Leyte jungle into a weapon. This was the Silent War, a period where the Japanese occupation forces began to realize that the most dangerous enemy wasn't the one they could see in a trench, but the one they couldn't hear in the brush. Nieves took her 110 men and drilled them in the art of the bolo. That bolo was more than just a farm tool. In the hands of her guerrillas, it was a silent executioner. It was a long, heavy, single-edged blade, balanced perfectly for a single, decisive strike. Nieves understood that ammunition for their homemade shotguns was too precious to waste on single sentries. She developed a series of ambush tactics that relied on total stillness. Her men would wait for hours, sometimes days, camouflaged in the mud and vines, allowing enemy patrols to pass within inches of their positions. Only when the target was isolated would they strike. There was no gunfire, only the sound of the jungle and the flash of steel. This is the era that produced the most iconic evidence of her career, the photograph taken by war correspondent Stanley Troutman. In it, the schoolteacher is seen demonstrating a silent kill technique to a U.S. soldier, PVT, Andrew Lapipa. She isn't shouting or posturing, she is calm, her hand positioned to cover the mouth while the other guides the blade. It is a terrifyingly clinical display of someone who had mastered the anatomy of the neck and the silence of the kill. She didn't just teach them how to kill, she taught them how to haunt. Her unit would leave small psychological markers to let the Japanese know they were being watched. A patrol would wake up to find their supplies sabotaged or their sentries missing without a single shot fired. This created a climate of paranoia. Japanese soldiers, used to the grand scale of the Pacific War, found themselves terrified of the shadows. The jungle was no longer a terrain. It was an adversary. Nieves utilized the hit-and-run philosophy to its extreme, striking at the smallest crack in the enemy's perimeter and vanishing before a counterattack could even be organized. She proved that a schoolteacher didn't need a battalion to paralyze an army. She just needed the patience of the jungle and the edge of a blade. By the time the Japanese realized they were in a silent war, they had already lost the psychological battle. They were fighting a ghost they couldn't catch, led by a woman they couldn't understand. By October 1944, the silent war of the Gaspipe Gang was about to collide with the greatest naval invasion in history. As General Douglas MacArthur's fleet darkened the horizon of Leyte Gulf, Nieves Fernandez and her 110 guerrillas transitioned from hunted fugitives to the primary intelligence asset for the United States Army. It is important to note here that every detail of this campaign, from her tactical maps to her unit's kill counts, is documented in the military archives and academic records we have linked in the description below for your own verification. When the Allied shells began to rain down on the coast, Nieves didn't stay in the shadows. Her unit began a high-stakes campaign of perimeter sabotage. While the Japanese were focused on the sea, the schoolteacher's army was behind them, severing telephone wires and blowing up bridges with improvised explosives. This prevented the Japanese from calling for reinforcements as the U.S. troops hit the beaches. The most brutal fighting occurred when the Japanese forces retreated into the vines, the thick, hilly interior they thought they controlled. They were wrong. Nieves personally led US infantry patrols through hidden jungle trails that didn't exist on any official map. She wasn't just a guide, she was a combat commander. Records show her unit engaged in fierce close-quarters firefights to clear out suicide nests and hidden machine gun pillboxes that were stalling the American advance, armed with their gas-pipe shotguns and bolstered by captured Japanese Arisaka rifles. The 110-man unit fought with a level of local knowledge the Allies couldn't replicate. They knew every cave and every ravine. By the time the Battle of Leyte reached its peak, the teacher who once had a 10,000 peso bounty on her head was standing alongside American colonels, directing the final sweeps of the island. She had survived the long years of the silent war to see her home liberated, proving that a schoolteacher with a pipe gun was more than a match for a professional army. After the smoke cleared and the last of the occupation forces were driven from Leyte, the world expected Captain Nieves Fernandez to pursue a life of military honors or political power. Instead, she did something perhaps even more remarkable. She went back to her life. She returned to her family and her community, trading the bolo knife back for the tools of a civilian. For decades, the story lived on primarily in the memories of the 110 men she led and in the dusty folders of military archives. She didn't seek the spotlight, and because of that, history almost let her slip through the cracks. She became a forgotten fighter, a footnote in the grand narrative of the Pacific War. But history has a way of resurfacing. The reason we are able to tell this story today with such precision isn't through rumors or internet myths, but through cold, hard evidence. From the front-page headlines of the 1944 Lewiston Daily Sun to the tactical reports preserved by the Philippine Veterans Affairs Office, her defiance is a matter of public record. However, a few-minute video cannot possibly capture the full depth of the academic and military research involved in verifying a life this extraordinary. To respect the integrity of this history, we have provided the direct links to the primary sources, including the SOFREP military analysis and the academia research papers, in the description below. We encourage you to click them, read the original reports, and see the evidence for yourself. Nieves Fernandez passed away in relative obscurity, but her legacy isn't found in monuments. It's found in the fact that her students grew up in a free Leyte. She proved that the title of teacher and commander are not so different. Both require the courage to stand up for the future. By supporting verified history, you are helping us ensure that fighters like Nieves are never truly forgotten again. The archives have been opened, the research has been cited, and the story of the schoolteacher with the 10,000 peso bounty is finally, officially, part of the record.